What we're also looking at when we look forward is this whole LAA thing, right? Where we're looking at carriers in unlicensed space, specifically in 5 gigahertz, really are the one band that we have that in general we have, enough channels and reasonable noise floors and things along those lines. And as we look at that, and as it's obviously, it's gone through various revisions, and one of the reasons they keep having these various revisions is because they can't operate with Wi-Fi well, right? But this is a carrier solution of one of the ways that they're trying to provide better service, but possibly at a detriment to Wi-Fi. And the question then becomes is if I allow a carrier to come into one of my buildings that has poor cellular coverage, and they implement a solution that sits in 5 gigahertz and creates issues for 5 gigahertz, do customers then stop using my wireless network that I'm providing and begin using the carrier's network over 5 gig simply as a method of getting around that, even though it's not my problem and I don't have the ability to control that other than telling a carrier you simply can't deploy. Now, I think it seems like this is one of those technologies that I'm not quite certain. It may be DOA. I'm kind of hoping it's DOA, but I also know that Verizon has come to my organization and has brought this up as an option.
I want to see a blog post out of you that says LAA, DOA, AOK.
Didn't we have a talk about acronyms?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to piggyback on that, and I'm curious, especially you guys, because I know we have university customers that Verizon's coming in, and they're kind of shoving LAA. I don't want to say just Verizon, because everybody has their own flavor of stuff, right? But
So define LAA real quick for the people at home and for me, because I'm not a Wi-Fi guy.
That's a good question. What does it stand for?
Little alien army.
Theft of unlicensed spectrum by someone who's going to sell it.
That's great. Yeah.
Wait, so how did that become LAA? Is it like a French thing?
Yeah.
Look at Los Angeles.
So is it?
License assisted access. Scott said it straight here. So basically, it's the carrier coming in to what JD was just saying, and they're using our unlicensed space in 5 gig, specifically with this one.
Channel theft.
And the different carriers are kind of saying, well, geez, customer, you're gonna have to do this, or else we're not going to support X, Y, and Z for you. And so we're digging in, because how do you know until you've actually tested it? And the information we've gotten back, and I'm going to anonymize this, but let's say a large wireless manufacturer basically says they did some real world testing, and I'm going to read the last part of the sentence, that basically it demonstrated the potential for significant degradation of APs that are co-channeled next to that system. And so where are we as an industry? Like, what is our standpoint on this as customers? And again, I think universities have been the place where I've seen most of our customers asking about this. I'm really curious what you guys are seeing and what you're doing.
Actually, I don't think there's anything we can do, because they're using unlicensed spectrum. I joke that they stole it. There's nothing they're stealing. It's something that's free. Everyone has access to it. They're just doing it in a way that they're taking something that's free and turning around and reselling it.
I feel like it's the problem of the bus. All the seats on the bus are available, but some people think they're available for backpacks and other stuff versus, I would like to sit down. And they're like, well, seat's a seat, man. I can put whatever I want there. Lee?
Well, I don't disagree with Keith that it's unlicensed spectrum, but you don't have to give them access to your buildings. You don't have to give them places to mount the stuff. I don't think at my university we've even seen anybody come knocking to ask. We've managed to prove that there's bad coverage and make carriers come into specific buildings and they do the in-building stuff to bulk it up beyond like femtocells and all of that. Just in a couple of spots, but like I said, the notion of somebody saying you're going to have to play this undesirable game or we'll penalize you, that at least in our circumstances it wouldn't wash at all. We've got maybe the power of being big enough to say no, it's not going to work here, and thankfully we've got a management culture of, if it's got antennas, go make sure it's not going to conflict with the campus wireless resources, because that is so pervasively used and so dependent upon for daily operations that people have become very mindful of, this is a resource to protect. So if anybody's going to do anything that's going to threaten it, we need to talk about it. Took a long time to get to that point, but thankfully, like I say, it's kind of a, cross-campus culture that recognizes the value of protecting the asset that is the wireless network.
Okay.
I see the kind of the same situation where luckily our clients have started to look at us and consult and talk with us so that they don't install like just any piece of junk that is supposed to solve all their problems without thinking first of everybody else on campus. Plus, and that's part of the culture, especially in public universities, that giving away something to an ISP, a specific ISP, is just not going to cut it. Just like they wouldn't want to sell only one kind of soda or only one kind of chocolate bar. It's especially in Canada, we're really into free speech and letting everybody share not the spectrum, but the resources. And if you guarantee to a company that they're going to get like all the sales of pop or all the sales of Wi-Fi or all the sales of this and that, you're up for a fight.
Mm-hmm. And universities still sell pouring rights contracts.
What?
Because, pouring rights contracts. So this university is only Coca-Cola. This convention center is only Pepsi. Because
no, we don't. Actually, we do not do that.
Maybe you don't.
Yeah, but there are many
Down here,
Oh,
you'd be
many do, but we're publicly funded,
Okay.
and we will not do that.
You and I need to have a conversation when this is over. But let me tell you that in the US, a dump truck full of $100 bills pretty much solves all of your free speech rights. Back it up. Jake?
So I think Lee hit it on the head. Is like you don't have to give people access to your buildings to install equipment. A lot of times that's what we do because it's money. They're willing to pay to put that infrastructure in rather than you paying to put a neutral host DAS in and say, hey, I'll let you plug into it. But we're, in addition to seeing them wanting to come in and play in 5 gigahertz, I'm also hearing people talking about carriers coming in wanting to already take over CBRS.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, CBRS, we'd love to put that in the building as well. And so, when you push back on 5 gig, they're, hey, well, we'll take those frequencies instead. And
So because it sounds kind of like, as JD mentioned, we kind of have morphed this conversation. It's still kind of a carrier 5G versus enterprise Wi-Fi, but we're starting to talk a lot more about spectrum. And that's a thing that we're starting to hear more and more about. And I know this because I just went and bought a whole bunch of home automation equipment, and it was great until I read on the box that it only works on 2.4. So now I have to make sure that my 2.4 SSID extends into the garage so I can open my garage door, and my thermostat only works on 2.4 because I've been trying to force all my clients off onto 5 for so long. And then, as we've heard from companies like Aruba, they're already starting to look at opening up 6 gigahertz. I made the internet mad when I started talking about auctioning off spectrum for the 5G that happened to overlap with weather satellites because they're detecting moisture on the ground. And someone's like, well, can't you just move it? I'm like, water resonates at that frequency. You can't fix physics. So let's talk about that spectrum piece a little bit because we're kind of hitting all around this. Is some of the solution to this problem, like JD was saying, and JJ was talking about as well, where people just kind of drop in and be like, hey, we're going to take over your unlicensed spectrum. Fine, just move it. Move to 6 gigahertz. You're cute. I am totally for sale. If you're watching this, no, I'm for sale.
So on the 6 gigahertz thing, and for those who, maybe let's start with the real basics of where we're at, right? So this is still being worked through with the FCC. Chuck over at Aruba has done a lot. There's a large team of people who've done an incredible amount of work to go to the FCC and say, here are the incumbents in the 6 gigahertz space. Here is how it can be used, and if they're successful, we're going to end up with a gigahertz of additional space. And when you start doing the math in your head and you start thinking about how many 20 megahertz channels or 40 megahertz channels that you can make out of that. That's a bunch of channels. So this is major, and it's vital to the continued success of Wi-Fi as we look forward for a couple of reasons. One, from the perspective of looking at, okay, we're seeing more things push into 5 gigahertz, and we're seeing more space. We're seeing higher density required, which impacts our channel plans. But the other thing too the other important thing to consider is when we start looking at 6 gigahertz for Wi-Fi, we're actually talking about greenfield, because you're not going to have prime, you're not going to have B, A, G, N clients, AC clients in 6 gigahertz. And so now when you think about all of those tricks that we play in Wi-Fi to keep clients, to keep all the clients working together, right? Whether it's CTS to self or whatever, all of that goes away, which also means that the management overhead decreases in a significant way. The other thing, Sam and I had a really great conversation with Stephen Orr at Cisco Live, who chairs the security working group with the Wi-Fi Alliance. And he actually brought up the fact that it's now written, it's clear that in 6 gigahertz, everything will be encrypted, including PMF. It's a requirement, right? And so when you also consider that, when we really go into 6 gigahertz from a Wi-Fi perspective, it is that ideal greenfield that we would all love and wish we could have in 5 gigahertz, because everything is secure, and we're capable of ignoring all of those other old
But
clients.
there's some mechanisms we don't have when you have a gigahertz to scan. So the way that clients today find the best AP is they go off channel and they scan. We have problems today with just how do I find a DFS channel, and clients are having difficulties because there's so many. What happens when you have 100? Where do you go? And so we don't have the current, even with AX, we don't have mechanisms to work in that size space. Now we might not get it all as one contiguous chunk. It might come in different parts, but there's some pieces where you have to look at even porting AX over.
If you make 11K NV mandatory for the client support on 6 gigahertz, it could help.
You said the M word. We don't do mandatory things around here. And we've seen that through the standards process. Well, this is mandatory. Well, then we're not going to support it because we don't like that. So that's a problem you're going to run into is as soon as you start dictating to people that they have to support these things, like even the supporting encryption, they may agree with you 100%. They're still going to make a big deal about it because some people just don't like being told what to do.
So how many times has the Wi-Fi Alliance tested roaming on a client in the 20 years we've had clients?
Lots. There's a whole certification program specific to roaming.
And how many of your clients have that certification?
It's not the Wi-Fi Alliance's problem, though. You said how many times have they done it? The answer is lots.
So they have a certification, and they don't apply it. They don't force everyone through it. This is back to the mandate.
I can't. I mean,
You answered
I'm
my
going to
question
force
with that.
you to buy stuff from me. You can't force people to do anything, right?
But Keith,
But you could put that in Wi-Fi 6 certification means you have to have tested your roaming.
but we see that with Apple all the time. They're not a member of the Wi-Fi Alliance. We don't care.
Okay, but there's the Wi-Fi 6, but there's also the roll-up for 802.11, right? So if it's part of the next roll-up of 802.11, it's a requirement for an AX or AX Wave 2, right? That's a little different than Wi-Fi Alliance. Jake?
So I don't see that 6 gigahertz solves this problem at all, because first they came for my 5 gigahertz, and I said nothing, and then they came for my CBRS, and I said nothing. You've got to look at that big chunk of spectrum that we're going to get some of, and those carriers are going to look at that like it's free money.
Licking their chops.
Yeah, and all these problems that we're going to have in 5 gigahertz with LAA and LTEU and multifier and all those things, they're going to show up in 6 gigahertz. And like, this might buy us some time, but I think you said it, it's like 6 gigahertz is vital for the continued development of Wi-Fi. And they've already got a blueprint of how to take it.
Yeah, so was all that extra spectrum in 5 gigahertz. It was vital to the success of Wi-Fi. Yet we missed out on that too. So, I mean, until the FCC says go, this is all 100% speculation. It doesn't, I mean, we heard 3 years ago, oh, yeah, device manufacturers are on board. Yeah, FCC is on board. Yeah, this is going to happen. You practically guaranteed this is going to happen. We're hearing the exact same thing. Until we have...
Same note, just a couple months ago, I was at a conference and the chairman of the FCC begged the audience to say, you want 6 gig? You have to go talk to your representatives, go back and push. It didn't at all feel like a done deal from that standpoint.
No.
Well, I think,
May, you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, and Francois blogged about it in Canada, and I think it's the same situation in Australia. There's a lot of countries looking up at the FCC. So, you know, if the industry really wants the spectrum, and like the manufacturers, the Ciscos and the Arubas and the Wi-Fi NICs manufacturers really want those frequencies, maybe they could work better at influencing Industry Canada and the Australian guys and all the other.
Europe and everywhere else.
Yeah.
Well, but everybody has different standards, because if you remember Chuck's presentation from WLPC, right? The US, there's a potential 1 gigahertz of space available, but in the EU, a big chunk of that is already used for proprietary things that can't be moved. So I think ultimately when you boil it down, right, every regulatory body is going to face different challenges around what they can
Oh,
make.
absolutely. But if everybody pushes in the same direction, you know, they could get some variant of it, but at least it would create some momentum, and maybe we would finally get it.
Everyone pushing in the same direction, though, is never going to happen.
right.
Nope.
Well, and I will also say that
It's a pious wish, but
for many years, I feel like the FCC has led a lot of that. Going back to Keith's comment, if you look at our current FCC chairman, he cares about where the money's at. That's all he cares about. So if you're looking for the FCC, the US FCC, to drive adoption of expanding that much, you know, frequency space that can be used for free, I think we have very little chance under the current chairman. I mean, if you look at every single thing that has come through the FCC that could potentially protect us as customers, that's all been scuttled. If you look at the things that have been accepted, like the current push for carriers into the 5 gig space, where there's money there, that has all been pushed through. So if the world is looking to the US FCC to lead this, I have very bad news for you.
Net neutrality.
yeah, well, maybe they, maybe,
Right.
Was that your cynical face there?
Looked pretty cynical to me.
Would you like to see? No, I wasn't cussing. I'm not
You have
cynical
major
until.
broadcast companies that own microwave links in that space in the US that they're not going to easily give that up, right? I mean,
Right,
that's-
yeah, exactly, right.
So it's a money play, like you said, and like Tom mentioned with the dump truck, right? I mean, a dump truck full of money solves all your problems. May not be the way you want them solved, but somebody's going to get them solved.
Actually, in that particular case, a giant Reese's coffee cup full of money fixes all of your problems.
But that also being said, if you look at what Wi-Fi actually generates in money or revenue per year, it's billions.
But is it in a giant Reese's coffee cup? Because that's where it is. And I'm sorry, May, but we're going back to things being for sale.
Well, and so I think Haydn, you get really close to the mark too, which is, okay, sweet, we're all up on this Wi-Fi 6 train. What's next?
Yeah.
How long before Wi-Fi 7 comes out? What does it even look like? The reality is that as we're deploying Wi-Fi 6 infrastructure gear, we may be 3, 4, 5, 7 years before the next generation of Wi-Fi comes. Well, what's that doing to folks like infrastructure manufacturers? What's it doing to the Arubas and Ciscos of the world, where they go, you know what, we make our living selling these things. There's going to be this nice big ramp, and then what? A fall off of infrastructure AP sales?
Yep.
They're not wanting that, and we want to continue to make gear.
We saw that with AC. There was the big push to get all the AC out the door.
What about it?
And then we had more features in Wave 2. It kind of feels like they're trying to create these slopes where they can keep selling gear forever.
No doubt about it.
Sam,
I'm sorry, Keith, I didn't mean to shock you.
Sam brings up a really good point there, though, when we look at, is it BD or BE? I think it's BE.
BE.
You know, one of the features that they're talking about with BE is the fact that you'll essentially have you'll have an uplink and a downlink, right? And so you'll have bidirectional communication. It's still shared space, so still not quite a switch, but you'll have same time bidirectional communication. Well, that now requires additional space per radio, right? Because now we're talking on one, listening to another. Now we're talking about two different spaces and 2 different RF spaces that are going to have to be separated, right? So that we're not getting co-channel contention, interference. We're not seeing shoulders. And so that's reliant on additional RF space.
Yeah.
We're already, from a channel reuse perspective, we're already tight. And now when you figure doubling that, right? Because every access point, every radio is going to need 2 channels instead of 1.
Or even more than that, because like if you look at what Cable Labs is doing with dual channel Wi-Fi now, right? It's not necessarily a single 20 megahertz downlink. It
Right.
could be a 40 or an 80 with only a 20 megahertz uplink.
Right, exactly,
So-
yeah. So there's a lot of things that's happening there that require additional spectrum. And so if 6 gigahertz doesn't happen, it's going to significantly impact how, what that looks like.
We just know that some manufacturer is going to come up with this stupid idea to create one giant 320 megahertz channel because they can.
It's happening.
Thank you, Jake.
Just so the marketing people can get their download, their speed stats.
That sounds like a single channel.
Okay,
It actually-
all right, but let's look at what that noise floor looks at that wide, and let's also look at what the power looks like, right? So it's not like we can ever.
But we're putting an AP on everyone's back as they walk in the door these days, right? So
Reminds me of your drag racing school buses blog post. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, since that conversation was just going down a train wreck direction. I wasn't going to bring this up because I was going to make it a sidebar later, but I'm curious if you said they're talking about that everything will be encrypted. What does that mean for our tools? Because look at SSL inspection, right? If we said, oh, let's secure all the things and web traffic and encrypt it and certificates, and now all of the tools we use to get that visibility and the security that we're trying to do, now we have to have this other tool that goes in and breaks into the first tool that we did and rips it apart so that we can inspect the traffic. So what is that going to be doing to the future of the tools?
So PMF is something that's used in a lot of environments already, and you're already capable of looking at the management frames and everything you need to see, with PMF turned on. So that's really all we're talking about. We're talking about PMF. We're talking about OWE. So that there won't be any open, unencrypted, Wi-Fi any longer, right? So really, it's what we're already doing. If you consider PMF and what we're already doing there, and you consider, you essentially just go, we're no longer not encrypting data frames. That's really all we're looking at.